what do you do? And, so we have, as part of the Republican package for public safety.
Good morning. Good morning. Thank you for joining us this morning. We have another great program. A couple of quick announcements. The coffee today was sponsored by Jane Ford, and we thank Jane for that. Also, we have openings in the next few meetings for anyone that would like to be a coffee sponsor. Let me know, or Carol Sutton, who is recuperating from a knee replacement and couldn't make it. If you really, really want to give me a check for dues today, I will take those. We'll get some kind of invoice out in the next few weeks. June meeting is set. It'll be on the fire department study. It'll be the mayor, the fire chief, Bill McCarty, and myself discussing the fire study that the city paid for. And in July, the meeting will be on the 100th anniversary of Route 66. That's not till 2026, but the plans are underway. Another really good program. The June meeting, by the way, is our annual meeting, and we will have a election of officers at that meeting. We're going to go ahead. I don't think Senator McClure has joined us yet, but I'm going to hand the program over to Dr. Beverly Bunch. Beverly sits on our board. She is, I'm going to get the professor of public management and policy at the University of Illinois, Springfield. And if I could invite Senator Turner to join us up here now also. And I will turn the program over to Beverly. Right or left? What would you like?
These big decisions early in the morning. Let's shake it up a bit. Ooh, the lights. Welcome to our session this morning. It's a pleasure to be here. Today we're honored to have hopefully two speakers, and I'll introduce our first one, the Honorable Doris Turner, who's a state senator from the 48th District. She is running for re-election in the newly redistricted 48th District. But today is not intended to be a debate. It's intended to be a conversation on the state of Illinois, what's been going on most recently, and what are the challenges and opportunities for the future. The format that we'll be using is we'll ask the Honorable Senator to give some opening remarks about the state, and then I'll ask some questions, and I'm a professor and I've got way too many questions. But the other thing professors sometimes do is call on people. So if you establish eye contact with me and smile, you might get called on. No, probably not, mainly because, as the senator said, these lights are so bright I can't see anybody anyway. So at this point, it's my pleasure to turn the stage over to Senator Turner.
Good morning. It's really exciting to be here. I remember coming to Citizens Club meetings when you all were first getting started, and it's amazing how far you all have come. And so I applaud Bob Gray and those who started this organization all those years ago. I'm always really happy to come out and talk about Illinois and the 48th. As you know, Springfield is my home. It's not just a place that I represent in the state capitol. And I'm really proud to be a native Springfieldian. I spent time on 10 years actually on the Sangamon County Board, and then transitioned to the Springfield City Council, where I was there for 9.5 years, and then in February of 2021 ascended to the State Senate. And in each one of those positions, I have always prided myself on working in a very bipartisan manner to do everything that I can to move our community along. And I think that I've been able to do that and do that extremely well. And a lot of times working with a lot of you that are in this room today. So when we talk about the state of the state, So I won't borrow a line from the president or the governor, but I will say the state of the state is strong. So, one of the things that I think we did during this past session that was most beneficial is that we passed a very strong budget that was balanced and had a lot of things in there that will be significant for the working families of our community. We talk about property tax relief, we talk about the income tax rebate, suspension of the grocery tax, the 6-month motor fuel tax suspension, and the expansion of the earned income tax credit. So those are all things that people can see, tangible things that you can see when you go to the grocery store and put your debit card in, and as we all know, prices now are just, kind of out the roof. But those are real-time things that you can see that will have a significant impact on you. The other thing that we did during this session that I think will be very beneficial is we talked a lot about economic development and what that means in our community. During my time on both the county board and the city council, I was very involved with trying to do everything that we could do to revitalize downtown. As I remember when I was a child, going downtown, and it was very vibrant. It was like our location on Friday nights. Downtown was open at stores until 8:30. Friday nights, our thing was going downtown, eating at cons, and then walking through all the stores and things. And we see all of that is kind of gone now, and downtown is not at all what it used to be. But we see with the renovations that are coming with the Armory building, I mean, that is going to be significant for our downtown and all of the other things that we are seeing down there. And then also the new building that's going to be going in with the Do It on Dirksen Parkway. Dirksen Parkway is an area that I represented on both the county board and the city council. I keep saying these people can't get away from me. They keep thinking I'm leaving, but I'm not. I keep pulling them back in. But that project is going to be significant for that Dirksen Parkway corridor. We see progress on the south end of that corridor. We see progress on the north end of that corridor. And that economic development piece right there is going to tie all of that together, and it's going to be significant for our community. It's going to bring a lot of new businesses there and, really encourage all of that development to happen in an area of our city where we are not seeing that. And I think that one of the things that we have to do is we have to look at our community as a whole. And we see a lot of development and things moving to the west and to the southwest. And that's going to be, I think a great equalizer and really equal out our community and see growth throughout our community. I remember not too long ago we were here at the Hoogland when we talked about the introduction of the Next 10. And part of what that Next 10 was about was the equalization of economic development throughout our entire community. And so I think that what we're going to be doing on that corridor of Dirksen Parkway is really going to tie in with that and what we're seeing, throughout our entire community. The other thing that we did during this session, we did a lot around public safety. I know that there's, that whole conversation about public safety, I think, has become very toxic. And people have kind of grabbed it and used it for their own political purposes, which is really, I think, not a good thing at all. And so we did a lot of great things, I think, around public safety. We put a lot of funding in for police and law enforcement. I introduced a bill to provide funding for a new Illinois State Police cadet class. And so that bill did not go through. However, the purpose of the bill was placed in the budget. So, we did see that. I think that I had asked for, in my legislation, I had asked for a one class, and I think what ended up in the budget was more like 3. And so, so I'm really proud of that, because when we talk about law enforcement and supporting law enforcement, we have to put all of our resources to bear. It can't just be talking about it. We have to put the resources behind it. So that was something that I pushed for and happened, and I'm really proud of that. The other thing is in that budget, there's a lot of support funding around mental health. That's something that there's still this huge stigma around mental health, and we have to do everything that we can to pull that back. You know, it's when people have situations where they may need to go and talk with someone, you know, they feel uncomfortable talking about that because they feel they're going to be seen as weak, or you know, you can't handle the pressure. You need to buck it up. You need to be strong. But you know, all of us, you know, I talk all the time about everyone has mental health episodes. You know, we all have them, but you know, they don't rise to being a mental health problem. But if we pull that stigma back and talk about these things more and provide resources and opportunities for people to get that support, then I think that we don't get to that point where you know, where we see what we're seeing now in our community and throughout our country. So there is a lot of funding in there around mental health, and not just for law enforcement or adults, but also for children. You know, there's significant funding and a real emphasis on education. And I will tell you that education is something that I've always been very, very, very interested and invested in. I began my advocacy career volunteering in my kids' schools when they were very young. And that's something that has stayed with me, you know, throughout my entire adult life. And I still spend a lot of time with District 186 because that is a priority. And you know, education is the foundation on which community is built. And we have to make those investments. And if you look at the budget that we have, there's a huge investment in not only K through 12, but also preschool as well as higher education. And included in that is a lot of resources for mental health in our schools. In District 186, we now have a social worker that's in each one of our schools, and that's significant because that's one more person that's in the schools that is trained to identify, you know, if a child may be having a problem that they want to talk to, or they feel they should talk to someone, but they don't feel comfortable, that they can come up and, you know, just kind of start that conversation. So I think that that's extremely important. And we all saw during COVID how that isolation impacted all of us. You know, it impacted our children and our young adults, our adults, and most definitely our seniors. And so there's also significant resources around, you know, outreach and support for our seniors as well as some workforce development. That's critical. You know, we see now all the issues that we're having with our, you know, supply chain issues and how we, you know, we're kind of at a standstill on things. If you go by, I was going by S&K because I live in that area. I go by there all the time, and I said, "Are you guys having a off-campus sale?" Because, you know, usually they'll take all their cars out, and they're like, "No, we just don't have any cars." And you know, it's the supply chain issues that we're seeing. So if we can start diversifying our workforce here at home and start, you know, building some of those things here and bringing those manufacturing back here and more specifically to Central Illinois, you know, that's how I think that we can continue to grow our community. So I think that, again, I know I'm probably need to
You're
fine. But if we think about that and we look at the things that I think are important that are included in our budget and the things that we worked on over this past session, I would really look at, you know, our economic development, our workforce development, public safety, and you know, and education. I think that those are all very critical things that we need to continue to support and continue to place as priorities so that we can continue to grow our communities and, you know, get to a point where we're all very vested and invested in that. Because, you know, that's my job, is just to, you know, continue to be a very involved, accessible, integral part of this community and take all of those concerns to the General Assembly and see how we can move those into a place to legislation, budgets, so that we can continue as a community to grow.
Thank you so much. It's my pleasure to introduce our next speaker, the Honorable Steve McClure, who's the state senator for the 50th District. He is running for re-election in the newly redistricted 54th District. Welcome, and as I said before you got here, this is not intended to be a debate. It's really a conversation with your constituents on the state of Illinois. So the floor is yours.
Oh, thank you very much. Well, it's been an interesting year in Springfield, an interesting session. I know that Senator Turner talked about public safety. I'd say one of my big disappointments of this session was the fact that I don't feel public safety was really addressed. There was a criminal law bill that was probably the worst bill that was, in my view, anti-law enforcement and pro-criminal that we've seen in our state's history. Since that bill passed at 4:30 in the morning, we have seen a record number of law enforcement folks leave the profession in the state, leave to go work in other states. We have seen a record number of sheriffs decide not to run for re-election, a record number of sheriffs retire, and all they got out of this session was some salary increases. But guess what? If you're law enforcement and you don't feel like the state of Illinois has your back, why would you want to put yourself in danger right now? And I think that's a very troubling thing, because in January of next year, what takes effect is the full measure of that legislation. And what is that going to mean? Crimes like arson, burglary, robbery. You will not be able to hold anyone in jail for pretrial detention at all for those crimes. Think about that for a second. In Chicago, just last year, someone was let go on pretrial release after being accused of burglary. They ended up burning down the house of their girlfriend and his child, or her child, killing both of them. So this is not good. One of the other things that's going to take effect is that you can't hold a person at all in jail before trial if they're accused of witness intimidation. And one of the most difficult crimes to prove in this state right now is a crime in which a person goes into a neighborhood and fires a gun. Why? Because much of that activity is gang related. And those people that witness this are scared to testify because they fear for their life and they fear for their families' lives. And what is the state of Illinois doing? They're going to take away the ability of law enforcement to detain people in jail that are accused of witness intimidation. So that was extremely disappointing. We had heard from the beginning of session that there's going to be something to address this bill, but nothing ever came of it. Other things that are going to take effect when this bill takes effect are for the crime of trespassing. If someone goes into your house, outside your house, and decides to pitch a tent and just live there, you can't do anything about it unless they're a danger to you directly. So if someone just says, I'm not going to hurt them, I'm just going to stay here in this tent, they can't be arrested. They can be given a ticket by law enforcement, but they can't be taken to jail. This stuff is not the stuff that any civilized society would be doing right now. So that's troubling that it was not addressed. Perhaps it will be addressed in veto session. We shall see. Now, another issue with public safety that we addressed a little bit was that one of my constituents, Deidre Silas, was brutally murdered. DCFS investigator showed up at a house in Thayer, Illinois. She was met by a man who had a knife, and he brutally stabbed her to death. Horrible, horrible. And I know that both Senator Turner and myself introduced legislation to try to deal with that and the after effects of that as far as the benefits for Deidre's family. And so, on the crime itself, though, it's troubling to learn that DCFS investigators are not allowed to carry anything with them to defend themselves. Nothing. I mean, think about that. You're going into a home. You don't know what to expect. You just know that there are allegations potentially that it's an abusive environment. Maybe the spouse is being abused. Maybe the children are being abused. And you can't bring anybody with you. You don't have enough resources to bring someone with you, and you can't bring anything to defend yourself. So I filed a bill to allow for DCFS investigators, and now it's all frontline DCFS workers, so all DCFS workers that go visit homes, to carry pepper spray with them. And there's a new course as part of that legislation where folks would, if they choose to carry pepper spray, would have to take a course that will be done in consultation with the Illinois State Police, which will teach them new self-defense moves, and it will also show them how to use pepper spray in an emergency situation, because a lot of people carry around pepper spray in this state. If you're a convicted double murder, you're allowed to carry pepper spray in this state. But a lot of people don't know how to use it in the split second necessary to use it if your life is in danger. So that's what this course would teach, and I think I'm very proud of that piece of legislation. I think it will save lives at some point, and it's on the governor's desk. I do anticipate the governor will sign the legislation. So, so that was a good thing. And, there were some other positive pieces of legislation, but overall, I was anticipating dealing with our public safety crisis right now in this state. And it's not just up north, it's also in the Springfield area. We've got a real problem, and all the bad things that the bill is going to do are going to take effect in January, and nothing's going to stop them unless we have new legislation to reform these changes.
Thank you. Well, I appreciate both of the senators' comments on the important role of public safety. And clearly this week, our hearts and minds are focused on Uvalde, the safety of children in our schools. I wonder if each of the senators could address what the state of Illinois' role is, what we're doing, and if there's a need to do more to protect our children. Senator Turner?
So, excuse me, Senator McClure talked a lot about public safety and law enforcement and and the Safety Act bill. So I was not in the Senate when that bill was passed, so I can't speak to it. I do know that there is a lot of hyperbole about the bill, and most people talk about it in a very negative way, and oftentimes don't even know what's in the bill. They're relying on sound bites for that. But I will tell you what I did during this General Assembly to address these issues. I look at crime and addressing it in our communities from a standpoint of law enforcement and communities being in partnership with each other, because it takes both of those working together if we're going to do anything to address the crime that we're seeing in our community. And so I look at it from a crime reduction, violence prevention perspective. And I worked with Representative Jahan Gordon Booth to put together some legislation that would provide funding for communities throughout the state that were experiencing these issues. And so I was able to put together a package that provided $3 million for Springfield, $1 million for Decatur to work on these issues. I have met with actually all of the mayors and police chiefs throughout the district to talk about how we can prioritize that funding and what it would mean for our communities. And so I think that is a huge step forward, because again, it takes that partnership between the community and law enforcement if we're going to get anything done. So that's a big piece that I'm very proud of, that we'll be able to put together and move forward. We also have looked at, I know that Senator McClure talked about the situation with DCFS and DCFS workers. And again, I started my comments with talking about always working in a bipartisan manner. And I'm really proud of the work that I did do in the General Assembly. And Senator McClure was a co-sponsor on 3 of my bills that I introduced and passed that address these situations. One of them was the night silence bill that we introduced that would increase the penalty for someone that attacked a frontline DCFS worker, investigator, or person in that capacity. That bill, Senator McClure and I worked very hard on it in the Senate. We were able to get it out of the Senate, and it stalled in the House. But we're not giving up on it. I think that we both have a commitment that we're going to work on that and try to bring it back during veto session and get that passed and get it to the governor's desk. The governor is very supportive of it. DCFS is very supportive of it. So I'm really feel pretty confident that we're going to be able to get that over the finish line. The other bill that I introduced that Senator McClure was a co-sponsor on, when Ms. Silas had young children. And, that's her mother is now caring for those children. It's a very devastating situation. As a mother, you never expect that you're going to bury your children. You always feel like that your children are going to outlive you. And she left young children. And unfortunately, she had one child that was needed some very specialized educational services, but was not able to access those because when Miss Silas died, her insurance coverage for her children died as well. Her mother reached out to me, and I was able to reach out to one of the school board members, Erica Austin, and she was able to link her into some, stopgap services. But I did introduce legislation, and it was passed, and the governor has signed it, that individuals who die in the line of duty, as Miss Silas did, their children would have insurance coverage, and it was retroactive, so that it would apply to her. And you would not believe the joy in her mother's voice when I called her to let her know that bill had passed, just to know that now, her grandchildren had that coverage and had that support. The other thing that we talk about in terms of law enforcement, there was a package of legislation that I introduced with my colleagues in the Senate that did provide for some increase in salaries, as Senator McClure mentioned, but it also did some things to talk about retention of individuals that are in law enforcement. We did see a number of people leave law enforcement recently, but when you think about that, how that transpires. So remember when President Bill Clinton was president, and he sent a significant amount of funding back to the states so that they could hire law enforcement officers, and that provided our communities to expand the ranks of law enforcement. So if you look at where we are now in that timeline, those are the officers that are retiring. They're at that retirement age. They're leaving. They're retiring. So we do have to look at how we encourage more to come in. And so the budget that I talked about, that included the money for the cadet class, that's one thing that we can do. But we also have partnerships with local community colleges and our local high schools, so that we introduce these professions to them, so that they can talk about those at an early age. Again, it's that partnership with community and law enforcement. Very, very, very important. And with the tragedy that we just saw in Texas, as a mother, I never had to worry about my kids not coming home from school when they left to go to school. Unfortunately, I do have to worry about that with my grandchildren. And we are at a time in our society where we have seen this proliferation of guns and how easy they are to get to them. And it also goes into the mental health issues that I talked about earlier. So Illinois has some of the strongest gun laws, and people talk about that when they say, well, we have all these strong gun laws. It's not about that, but we have to look at this from a national perspective, because while Illinois has all these strong gun laws, that's not the case with the states surrounding us. So if you look at crimes that are committed with guns, if you trace those guns back, the vast majority of those do not originate in Illinois. So we have to, I have been really working with our federal delegation to see what we can do on a national level about guns and how we get those out of our community. So it's something that we can, we've really done, I think, a good job of in Illinois, but we have to look at it from a national perspective.
Thank you. Senator McClure, would you like to respond about safety in our schools?
Yeah, so it's been troubling over the last couple of days to learn that a lot of the statutory requirements that schools have as far as reporting as to how safe they are and what their security protocols are, et cetera, are not being followed. And that's just come out the day of this horrific, horrible event that unfolded. And so we first have to look at each school to see what they're doing to protect our kids. And that's very important. And we need to make sure that they are following our laws. And that's typically what we're seeing in some of the cases recently have been that laws that are in place are not being followed. And, I think I'd also go to what's been happening with DCFS and the DCFS audit, because a lot of these young people that end up doing horrible things, signs are there, signs are present for many years before these acts are committed. And one of those important state agencies that deals with kids that are troubled and that deals with kids that are abused is DCFS. So the DCFS audit that showed that a lot of DCFS's statutory requirements are not being followed, that's troubling. And we've got a DCFS staff who is struggling to keep up with their workload, because all of these DCFS workers across this state are taking on more cases than they are supposed to, because they're short-staffed right now. And so when there are allegations of child abuse or neglect, and you've got someone that's supposed to go investigate that, if they don't have the resources and the time to do that because they've got so many cases, that's a problem. And it's not just a problem for those children and their families, it's also a problem for other children that could be put at risk if something in that household triggers that child to do something else. And so this is really significant and important. And, I think at DCFS, quite honestly, the director of DCFS, who's been held in contempt of court now quite a few times, he needs to go. We've got to start over there. There's a lot of really, really wonderful workers at DCFS. Many of them fear for their safety, and many of them fear for the safety of kids and communities. And I think the director has to go, and we've got to do more to recruit people to work for DCFS. I think it does start with the legislation that Senator Turner talked about, that she and I worked together on, and the pepper spray bill as well, which makes people feel as though they can actually protect themselves and defend themselves, because there's a concern for people that don't want to take the position because they don't want to get injured or murdered. And so that's significant. And once we get enough staff, and once we figure out some of these other problems as to why these reporting requirements are not being met, we've got to utilize our UIS training facility for DCFS investigators and caseworkers much more thoroughly. Because what happens now is that these folks from DCFS go to UIS to train for 5 days, and they only get like 4 or 5 hours of actual training where you're in simulations. And I think that's important for simulation training, maybe more so for DCFS than any other state agency, because you need to know the signs to look for abuse and neglect and those types of things. And you can only really do that by practicing. I don't think that the best education for a lawyer is law school. The best education for a lawyer is actually working in the courtroom and learning. I mean, my education as a lawyer came really when I did the trial advocacy program, where we worked on trial teams and really proceed like we were actually in court. That's what they do at this DCFS training facility. And for them to do this hands-on training and to look at these rising deaths at DCFS for kids that are being taken care of, look at the signs, what happened there, what was missed, and then implement that in the training protocol for DCFS and allow for more training. That's going to be critical in not just helping to protect kids, but also identifying kids that may be very troubled that we can perhaps help.
Thank you. Well, I have more questions, but at this point, I'd like to open it up to the audience if there's people who have questions. I think we do have a mic in the audience. Well, I'll go ahead and ask another question while the audience continues to think. Switching focus a little bit, you mentioned economic development and the work on Dirksen Parkway. The passage of the Federal Infrastructure Act last year is going to introduce lots of funds into our state and localities. What will be the impact that you envision on our local community, and how will decisions be made about how to allocate those funds? Senator Turner?
So the passage of the infrastructure bill is significant and will continue to be significant for our community from a couple of different vantage points. I think that one thing that we can look at is that it's going to mean some significant good-paying union jobs. And that's, we talk about how we keep our communities rolling and what we can do to spur economic development. When people have a job, they have money, they're spending their money, and that's a trickle down effect. that dollar gets, passed around and around and around. And so that's going to be very, very significant. But it's also going to mean that the infrastructure in our communities is going to be significantly increased. We're going to see new roads. We're going to see new bridges. We're going to see, all of those things that we need to keep things moving. You see in our community the rail relocation that's happening. That is significant, not just for that corridor, but it's going to mean economic development on both sides of those tracks. And that's a project that's been like 20 years in the making. Nobody thought it would ever happen, but we see what's happening now with bringing all of that transportation together in one spot. So it's going to be significant for our community and when we have better infrastructure, that also spurs on economic development. People will bring their businesses to our community, and which will provide more jobs and more economic development for our community. So it's going to have a significant impact, and I think that we're going to be able to see that in a lot of different ways, from the employment aspect as well as from the economic development aspect, and better roads and bridges and rail and all of those things for our communities.
Senator McClure?
Absolutely. There are going to be a lot of exciting projects. Our infrastructure right now is really seeing a lot of improvements because of the Capitol bill. I do think that I would love for high-speed rail to be a priority for Springfield. I think that there's a lot of people that have been working on that for several years. It's not at the moment heading anywhere, but I think that into the future we can perhaps see that when we get the new transportation hub and everything else. So that's exciting. As far as how the money's going to be shelled out, that's always a tricky subject, because it depends on who's in power, really, federally and statewide. We're seeing that with the Capitol bill, I've still got projects that are waiting to get funds released. The most recent one was on Chatham Road. We resurfaced Chatham Road. That was paid for with my membership initiative funds, as well as membership initiative funds from Representative Murphy, and then myself and Representative Hamilton were able to get those funds released. But the Capitol bill's been a few years now, so it takes years for these projects to get released. It's one thing to have something laid out in a bill. It's another thing to actually get it funded. And when I took office, and I'm sure Senator Turner can relate to this, several people came to me and said, "We got this project funded 10 years ago. It's in the bill, but we've never gotten the funds released." So it's a real working. It takes a lot of work to actually get things done at the end of the day. So we'll see how long the federal legislation takes to get done, but it typically is a very long process.
Thank you. We have a question from the audience. I think we have a mic here in the front, Jim. Just a sec, he's coming your way.
Oh, okay. I wanted to focus on something that wasn't quite mentioned yet, and it relates to everything that was talked about, from crime to mental health, as well as jobs, and that would be the subject of teaching. I understand and realize that there was a teaching bill that was signed and passed, but I didn't know the specifics of it. I'm referring to everything from the hiring practices, as well as the shortages of teachers that we have right now. So can I get either you or both of you to elaborate on that part in regards to some of the subject matters you just already mentioned?
Oh, happy to. So the bills that you're talking about, there was actually a bill signing at Springfield High School maybe about a month or so ago. There was a package of bills that I sponsored along with my colleagues in the Senate and the House that addressed the teacher shortage that was really kind of exacerbated and brought to light during COVID. We had an issue with our substitute teachers as well as permanent teachers in not just in District 186, but throughout the state. So that package of legislation provided several different things, because it was probably, I think, 5 bills that were included. And one of those bills talked about substitutes being able to be in the classroom 5 days longer than they are now. The other one was some support around individuals that were going into teaching, and assistance with student loans and curricula, those kinds of things. That was the second one. And then there was another one that talked about licensure for teachers, and if you had, instead of waiting until you were had completed all of your requirements and all of your student teaching and everything, that if you had a specific number of hours, you could be licensed to go into the classroom. So that was, again, to address the teacher shortage. So it was significant, and I think that it was a real step forward. Again, strong supporter of public education, and we really need to do everything that we can to get more teachers into our classrooms and have more young people go into the teaching profession. When we did that bill signing, there was a young lady there who was participating in a program that District 186 has in the high schools for students that are interested in going into teaching. It's a teacher preparatory curricula. And she was one of those students, and she talked about how the impact that her teachers had on her and what drove her into going into the profession of teaching, and what what this package of legislation would mean to her. And then we also had another young person that was there that was finishing up her student teaching and was looking to go into her first job, and was talking about what that support around her financial ability would mean. So it was a complete package that took all of those things into consideration.
And just on that topic, I filed a bill that was passed and signed by the governor last year, in which it makes it easier for public schools to recruit teachers who have previous experience in private schools, so they can buy back 2 years of their pension, but they have to pay back all the fees for the pension, both the employer contribution, the employee contribution, and any interest. In addition, it opens up the ability for much more experienced teachers to teach during summer school last year and this year to try to make up for the COVID-19 learning gap. One of the problems that's been happening with the teacher shortage is that in the rural areas, we learned over the course of this last couple of years just how poor the internet service is for these kids, and just how difficult it is for them to try to work from home. So that's caused a lot of kids to really be underwater, and I suspect it's going to take some kids 3 or 4 years to recover from this. And so that's significant. But in the rural schools in particular, what's been happening lately is that the healthcare benefits are terrible. In fact, some of the teachers that I've met with have told me that, they've got to get help from their spouse to pay for their healthcare that's supposed to be provided to them when they're a teacher. So how are we going to convince people to move into the rural areas to teach kids that need to be taught when they can't get quality healthcare, when their salary is not very good relative to other professions? And there's just an environment right now that has kind of been attacking teachers in general. And so the movies that I grew up with when I was younger, like Mr. Holland's Opus and those have kind of dissipated. And now we've got a lot of younger people that want to do other professions. And the profession of teaching, which is so important, needs to be emphasized in a way that's much more positive. And I think we need to do a lot more to deal with this teacher shortage that's still happening in our state right now.
Hi, my name is Dr. Lisa Smith. I work with pediatrics, and I work in mental health too with the kids. I have a question that goes back to the other issue of mental health with children. We were talking about identifying kids that have problems and then getting them help. And I just want to say that identifying those kids is the first step, but there is no help for those kids. So whenever you have these teenagers or these middle school kids that have some mental health issues, and that there could quite possibly, you're just not sure what's going to happen with this kid, and you want to get them help, or they need to have a residential placement for safety. There are no residential facilities for these kids to go to that need intense residential care. You can admit them to the hospital for, a week or 2 weeks, and they can do some intense, it's usually medication related. But when you know that these kids are not safe at home, or you're worried about their mental health at home or at school, there's nowhere for them to go when you got parents begging you to put them somewhere where they can be safe. The parents know, the school knows, people know that they have a problem, but there's nowhere for these kids to go for long-term mental health treatment, and getting them in somewhere, paying for that. It's $100,000 a year sometimes for these facilities.
Great,
Parents can't
great.
pay for that.
Thank you.
So,
We'll turn to Senator McClure first for this one. Thank you for your question.
Yeah, no, so that's a great point. And you've got a place like Lincoln Prairie that's constantly full. So they're full all the time. So what do you do? And I think that's a real problem in our state right now, and it's not just for kids, it's for adults. Mental health issues. And there's not adequate funding, and I think a lot of the funding that's been provided in the last 2 years has been really to provide old programs that really aren't working, and they're not addressing the issues that are there. I mean, lots of people will get arrested just because there's nowhere else for them to go. And what do you do? And, so we have, as part of the Republican package for public safety, we were advocating for mental health services in jail. And I've been advocating for new staff and unique staff to identify exactly what you're talking about, kids that need help, and give them the tools to help them. Because these guidance counselors and these teachers, they don't have the resources, and they don't have the quite frankly, the time to deal with this, because they've got to deal with all the other issues that are happening in schools right now. So I think that we need to hire some more people that are uniquely qualified to deal with these issues in schools. We need to give them funding, and we need to have more resources for local law enforcement, so that when someone goes into the county jail that's got mental health issues, those issues can begin to be addressed, instead of allowing that person to spiral further into some horrible thing that could, affect everybody in the community soon after they're released. And so we need to do more to fund treatment, and we need to do more to get more staff in those schools to handle exactly what you're referring to.
So it's interesting that you raised that issue for a couple of reasons. Number one, Senator McClure is right, but again, I go back to in the budget there was significant funding that is tied back to mental health for law enforcement, adults, and children, and we see that now coming down in our schools, where we do have social workers in all of our schools to provide that support, people that are trained. So that's one thing that we are doing now. The issue that you raised about the in-treatment. So a lot of the problems that Senator McClure and others talk about a lot around DCFS and the director being held in contempt all those times goes back to what you just raised. There are no beds. You can't place someone if there's no place to place them. And this is not just an issue that arose overnight. We go back to, and most of you in this room know me, and you know how I have lived my whole elective life. I don't see my job as placing blame. I see my job as looking for solutions. But we oftentimes have to look at how we got to this problem so that we can move forward with the solutions. And we didn't just get here overnight. In the previous administration, we lost a significant number of beds because of the budget impasse, and people weren't getting paid, and they couldn't afford to provide those services, so they had to cut those beds out. So all of that went away. Hundreds of those beds went away. So now we're working on building those back, and we didn't lose them overnight. We can't build them back overnight, but we've made significant progress. We have a significant number of those beds that we've brought back, and we're continuing to work on that. So these are problems that we're continuing to work on, and we have seen significant progress, and we will continue along in that vein. But that's kind of the problem that we find ourselves in. But we are, as a state, working on those issues because we know that that it's significant to address the problems that we're seeing in our community. Mental health is a huge issue, and unfortunately, it's one where, I talked about this earlier. There is so much stigma surrounding it that's one of the things, hard work that we really have to do, is removing that stigma so that we can then move to address all of these issues in an open, honest, and transparent way.
I think maybe one more question there in the back.
Thanks. We saw major energy legislation pass through the State House in 2021. So my question to you is, are we moving in the right direction with where we're going with energy here in Illinois? We see infrastructure going up in the last year or so. We see over in Morgan County, we see a great big windmill farm going up. Same thing up in Mason County. We've got a 600 megawatt solar farm being put in southern Illinois, and another huge solar farm going in up in Logan County. So we see a lot of infrastructure going on. My question is, are we moving in the right direction with our mix of energy and our energy needs here in Illinois? How do you feel about the legislation a year, almost a year later after it's passed through the State House?
No, we're not moving in the right direction. And you can check your most recent energy bills, and you're going to see that what's coming into fruition is what we said on the Senate floor when this bill was being debated, that this was going to cause the largest increase in rates in the history of our state. And that's exactly what you're going to see. You're also going to see potentially power shortages. And those have already been warned about in the news from some of the power companies in the last couple of weeks. So it was a piece of legislation that was mainly ideological. It was not based upon current technology. And when you're just basing your policies on ideology rather than facts, nothing good typically happens. And that's true whether it's a Democrat doing it or a Republican doing it. So it's not good right now. And I would love to address this. And now I think Governor Pritzker is going to give some sort of a bonus or something to people to try to help pay for their electricity bills, that sort of a thing. This is a problem that's not going to go away, unfortunately. And so it's bad. It's moving to be even worse. And that's why I voted against it. I want to bring up something really quickly, too, while I'm thinking about this, about DCFS and beds. And I know this is still towards the last question, I know. But, you know, it's amazing. The director of DCFS, he can't find any placement for these kids. And all of a sudden, he's found in contempt of court. And sure enough, within a few days, there's placements. So these are available. It's just unfortunate what's happening at DCFS. And I'd also say, you know, there's discussion about, well, it's all because of the previous governor. Governor Pritzker's had a budget with supermajority of Democrats in 2019, 2020, 2021, and now here we're in 2022. If he is blaming Governor Rauner for his issues with DCFS, I think we need to really hammer back at that, because that's ridiculous. We're all in the legislature, we're all in state government to do things and to be proud of our accomplishments. To blame somebody else for issues that the department under your leadership has caused, I think is just a cop-out, and that's unfortunate.
Senator Turner.
I think when I made my statements, I said I'm not about laying blame on things. I'm just trying to get to a solution. But I think that all of us know back in grade school, in order to get to the solution, you have to first identify the problem, and that was the problem, the huge loss of beds. Moving on to the next subject of energy. The energy legislation was very, wow, it was a lot, wasn't it? It was a lot, and there were a lot of moving parts to that, and I really kind of found myself in the middle because of I live in Springfield. Was on this Springfield City Council, worked very closely with CWLP, and so I was really thinking about CWLP and what that meant to our community, not only the jobs, but just that having our own municipally owned power plant and what that whole thing meant to our community and our rates. And of course, I'm a ratepayer, so I was really concerned about what that was going to do with our rates. And so I spent a lot of time with CWLP leadership. I spent a lot of time with the leadership with the mayor in both Springfield and Decatur, because they have a similar situation in Decatur with their power over there. They don't have a municipally owned power plant, but they have a very similar situation. So we talked a lot about the energy legislation and what it would mean. I was able to get some concessions in the bill in terms of dates and timelines, and that was very important. And I think that it's going to be very important to everyone in this room that I was able to get that. But what we're seeing now is something that we talked about when that legislation was being debated, and unfortunately, there are things that are on the horizon that we're working towards, but things don't get ramped up as quickly as we would like for them to. We're in the process of ramping up with our solar farms. We're in the process of ramping up, with wind, but we're still in that flux area where the legislation is passed, but we still need to work on that ramp up. But we are going to do everything that we possibly can to ensure that consumers are not placed in a situation where their energy bills are going to go through the roof, where they can't afford to keep their lights on, or where they're going to have to make some real hard choices. We saw what happened in Texas last year, and we definitely are not going to have that happen in Illinois. But the energy legislation, though, I think is one that we were always moving in that direction. I think we just got there a little faster than what our infrastructure was ready for us to. But we're going to continue to work on it because it is important. It is important to our community. It is important to our future. So we're going to continue to work on it.
And with that, I think we've reached the 9 o'clock hour. So please join me in thanking our senators, Senator Doris Turner and Senator Steve McClure. And that concludes our program. Thank you so much for joining us.